an overpumped balloon. Measuring your blood pressure every day can save you from risk of high blood pressure. MicroLife fully automatic upper arm blood pressure monitor with stroke risk detection. MicroLife AFib screens for atrial fibrillation while taking your blood pressure. High blood pressure and atrial fibrillation are both considered controllable risk factors for stroke. If AFib is present during blood pressure measurement, the AFib icon is displayed flashing at the end of the triple measurement. Once 3 measurements are complete, the measurement data are shown on the display. MicroLife, a partner for people, for life.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of Almighty God be with you. And welcome to another exciting episode of Doctor in the House. I'm your host, Dr. Ahmad Rahman, and it's a pleasure to have you with us again. So this is a special night here on Doctors in the House as we're closing off new episodes for the month of Ramadan, which is about a week away. So this episode will be a bit of a Ramadan special. Ramadan is a month where Muslims seek God's pleasure through various acts of worship. We abstain from vain talk or backbiting, we read the Quran, stay awake at night, and offer extra prayers. We give in charity and strive to achieve a state of God consciousness. Most notably, as some of you may already be aware, adults who are in good health and not traveling abstain from food and drink from the break of dawn till sunset for 29 or 30 days. That is to say, in Trinidad this year, about 14 hours of daytime fast with absolutely nothing by mouth. Fasting during Ramadan involves profound changes in our daily eating patterns, which impacts heavily on our body's daily biorhythm and challenges the regular functions of the digestive tract. This has important implications for persons with chronic diseases, including diabetes and inflammatory bowel disease, and many questions arise about daily life and how it is affected, and perhaps how habits should be adjusted during the Ramadan fast. Tonight, I'm pleased to have on my guest, my brother, Dr. Ahmad Rahman, a general practitioner with over 25 years' experience to discuss this topic in our second segment. As for now, let's move on to our first segment, Medical News, where we discuss some current medical news and trends relevant to us here in TNT. With a special focus on Ramadan in tonight's episode, one situation often encountered by doctors is the pregnant patient, who inquires as to whether or not she can fast. Now, to start with, pregnant women are exempt from fasting out of concern for the well-being of themselves or the pregnancy, the baby, and any decision to do so is entirely voluntary. With that being said, a group of investigators from the Hawla Medical University in Iraq conducted a study at the Hawla Maternity Teaching Hospital of Erbil, Iraq, to get data on perspectives and pregnancy outcomes in maternal Ramadan fasting in the second trimester of pregnancy. According to this study published online this month in the journal BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth, it appears that fasting during the month of Ramadan in patients who voluntarily fasted is associated with no significant adverse events to baby or mother, and a significant decrease in the incidence of gestational diabetes, also known as diabetes of pregnancy. The study was conducted from October 2017 to January 2018 in Iraq, where the temperatures reached 50 degrees Celsius at midday, with fasting times of up to 18 hours per day. Out of 301 participating women, 155 fasted during the second trimester of their current pregnancy, while the remaining 146 did not. Mothers were asked about their fasting behaviors and perception of fasting during pregnancy. The main outcomes of this study were the incidence of gestational diabetes, preterm labor, preeclampsia, low birth weight of the baby, the APGAR scores, as well as height, weight, and the head circumference of the newborn. The results of the study revealed that there was no statistical difference between the two groups with regards to preterm labor, or the incidence of preterm labor, preeclampsia, low birth weight, APGAR scores, height, weight, or head circumference of the newborn. For the mother, weight gain during pregnancy was less than 1 pound difference in those who fasted when compared to those who did not fast. The incidence of gestational diabetes, and that is diabetes that comes on with pregnancy and usually leaves after the pregnancy over, was significantly lower in the fasting women at 2.6%, while it was 8.3% in the non-fasting mothers. The chances of the difference between those two groups was due to chance was 2%, or a p-value of less than 0.02. Further analysis showed that women who did not fast during the second trimester of pregnancy were 1.5 times more likely to develop gestational diabetes than those who fasted. It was also found that among the women in the fasting categories, those who fasted for 21 to 29 days during pregnancy had a lower risk of gestational diabetes compared to other groups. The results also showed that the decision to fast during pregnancy was negatively associated with the mother's educational level. That is to say, that women in the study who were better educated were less likely to decide to fast. It is perhaps telling that more than half of the mothers in the fasting group, 60%, perceived that fasting during pregnancy was compulsory for healthy and non-healthy women compared with those who did not fast. Now, this was a small study with slightly more obese and overweight women in the fasting group, 64 versus 51 in the non-fasting, and the authors were not entirely clear on exactly how they recruited participants. So the results do have to be taken with a pinch of salt, and larger studies have to be done in order to confirm these findings. The authors also commented that this study revealed that some of the pregnant women, at least in Iraq, did not fully recognize their right of being exempted from fasting by the Islamic law, and that it is critical to raise the mothers' knowledge regarding this issue by establishing official guidelines. So, in summary, if a woman is pregnant, she is exempt from fasting, and the decision to do so is entirely optional, and Muslim women might not be aware of this. In those who voluntarily decide to fast, it may actually be beneficial in terms of preventing gestational diabetes, particularly in overweight and obese subjects. In other news, a group of investigators from the United Arab Emirates University conducted a study to determine the effect of high-fiber cereal intake on satiety and gastrointestinal symptoms during Ramadan. Published in this month's issue on the online journal Nutrients, the aim of this study was to assess satiety or fullness, bowel habits, body composition, blood sugar levels, blood lipid levels after the consumption of a high-fiber cereal at dawn, suhoor, during the month of Ramadan. Participants were randomized to consume either 90 grams of a high-fiber cereal at 11 grams of fiber per 90 grams of cereal at suhoor for 20 consecutive days, or to maintain the habitual dietary intake. The groups were 45 with this high-fiber cereal and 36 without. The study revealed that the high-fiber cereal group reported higher satiety rating scores, improved bowel habits, and reduced frequency of bloating after the 20-day intervention. Total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol was significantly lower in the intervention group compared to the control at the end of the intervention. No significant differences were observed between the two groups with regards to body weight, fat percentage, waist circumference, body mass index, blood glucose, or HDL, or good cholesterol, or triglycerides. The authors did note that they observed significantly higher intake of carbohydrates and dietary fiber in the high fiber cereal group. These may have impacted on the results. So, in summary, it appears that consuming high fiber cereal before the crack of dawn at suhoor had a positive effect on health and well-being during the daytime fast in the month of Ramadan, with better satiety, or more fullness, improved bowel functions, more bowel movements per day or closer to an ideal number, and improved blood lipids. The take-home message: high fiber cereals with 90-gram portions containing 11 grams of fiber are a good option for a quick and healthy suhoor. Of note, and on a practical point, a 100-gram serving of oats has about 11 grams of fiber and is a good cheap option for a quick filling suhoor or breakfast. And if you're lactose intolerant, almond milk is a delicious alternative, or even soy milk. A boiled or poached egg would help to fulfill your protein needs, and vegetables and fruits will also help fulfill the vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients that you require. So moving on, in another study published this month in the International Journal of Vitamin and Nutrition Research, investigators out of Iran assessed the effect of Ramadan fasting on patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And that's a situation where there's fat deposited on the liver in the absence of heavy alcohol use, which is known to cause fat deposition on the liver. This usually happens, as we've mentioned on previous episodes, in persons who have the metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and high cholesterol, or overweight. And you can see on the graphic here, just at the top, that the fatty liver eventually can progress to cirrhosis, or thickened scarring of the liver. So it's not always a benign thing, and sometimes this can actually, the amount of fat on the liver can be detrimental. So it appears that Ramadan fasting also improves liver function and total cholesterol in patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and that's of particular interest to me. In this study, 83 patients with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, 57 males and 26 females, were enrolled in the study. 42 patients who practiced Ramadan fasting and 41 patients in the non-fasting group. Anthropometric parameters such as waist, circumference, and weight, and height, and ultrasound grading were measured before and after Ramadan. The blood tests, including lipid profiles, LDL and HDL, cholesterol and triglycerides, and liver enzymes, were evaluated before and after Ramadan. Decreases in anthropometric measures such as waist circumference and weight and height were significantly different between both groups, favoring the fasting group. Similarly, the total cholesterol values in the fasting group were remarkably higher than in the non-fasting group. The changes in the concentrations of liver enzymes, as well as the severity of fat deposition on the liver, or hepatic steatosis, showed remarkably and statistically significant differences between the two groups. Now again, standard disclaimer. This was a one study with a small number of subjects, and although the results are quite remarkable, further larger studies ought to be done to verify these results. However, if your question is, can I fast during Ramadan if my doctor told me I have a fatty liver or fatty liver disease, then the answer is a resounding yes. And intermittent fasting may be beneficial even outside of Ramadan, and this is something you may want to talk to your doctor about. So, I think we've been on for a while. We're going to take a little break and pay some bills, and we'll be back after a few messages. Take care.
High blood pressure is as dangerous as an overpumped balloon. Measuring your blood pressure every day can save you from risk of high blood pressure. MicroLife fully automatic upper arm blood pressure monitor with stroke risk detection. MicroLife AFib screens for atrial fibrillation while taking your blood pressure. High blood pressure and atrial fibrillation are both considered controllable risk factors for stroke. If AFib is present during blood pressure measurement, the AFib icon is displayed flashing at the end of the triple measurement. Once 3 measurements are complete, the measurement data are shown on the display. MicroLife, a partner for people, for life.
Extra Foods Plenty for 20 is bigger and better with new items like Gala apples 10 for $20, Caribbean flavor spices assorted 6 for $20, Happy Chow Mein noodles 5 for $20, Ginseng up 250 ml assorted 5 for $20, Fiesta Vienna sausages 5 for $20, Marigold margarine 4 for $20, and Libby's mac and cheese 4 for $20. Over 40 items on special in Extra Foods Plenty for 20. Extra Foods, always something extra for you.
And welcome back to Doctors in the House. And this evening, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our specially invited guest, my brother. One of the reasons I went into medicine as a child, deciding that I was going to become a doctor. General practitioner with over 25 years experience, Dr. Ahmad Rahman. Welcome to the show, Bo.
My pleasure to be here. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Pleasure.
So, I've asked you to come on tonight at very short notice to discuss with us a little bit about Ramadan. And I thought with Ramadan coming up, this is a good opportunity for us to get some of the medical sides of it out to people. And, you know, I've noticed at functions and prayers, people always have these questions that they want to sit down with you and ask. But I figured this was probably a good format for us to be able to get this out to the general population.
Yeah, I welcome the opportunity to come and chat with you. This is the first time I'm joining you on air. It's really a pleasure, alhamdulillah. The idea of fasting and Ramadan and health issues that are associated with it is, I think, quite a significant one, and it's quite a good time, I think, for us to broach it before Ramadan has started. Like you say, we do have questions that tend to arise during Ramadan, but it's always a good idea, I think, to address these issues in advance as best as possible. There are some conditions that ideally you really should have a good plan long before Ramadan started, before you really decided whether you either are going to fast, you should know how you're going to fast, and so on. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that as the program goes on. Excellent.
So I suppose we can jump right into it. And I spoke a little bit on your introduction about exemptions from fasting. I chatted a little bit actually about what fasting is at the beginning, and I think broadly we could probably, for the purposes of the discussion of fasting here, talk about the abstention from food and drink. But I suppose in practice and with patients there are more things than just the food and drink, I mean medications and stuff otherwise. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, certainly. The general idea behind fasting as Muslims, having fasted for a larger portion of our lives, adult lives, we're very familiar with it, you and I, but we tend to approach it by God's grace from being generally healthy folk. And generally, we therefore may not have at the forefront of our minds what do we do with medication, are certain things allowed for us to use during fasting. But certainly these are thoughts in the minds of many patients. And it's over the years, certainly I would, and many of my colleagues and yourself as well, I'm sure, would encounter a number of people who have significant questions. Medications come in a variety of different modes, oral, inhaled, intranasal, injectable, frequency, how often you have to take the medication, and of course, certainly all of these definitely impact on a person who's opting to fast, side effects, etc. whether there are any specific precautions associated with taking the medications, for example, with meals, without meals, better to be taken on an empty stomach, and so on. And there are a variety of different things that can be associated with things, but the more common ones I've noticed, on the top of the list is usually people who are diabetic.
The most common condition in Trinidad.
Yeah, I mean, if the last time I checked, it was about 13% of the population is estimated to be diabetic. So I think it's quite a significant condition for us to talk a little bit about. But there are many other people who have chronic diseases as well, who are quite ill and who are very desirous of fasting. And they ideally should, if you are interested in fasting and you think you want to fast, that you should really have a conversation with your doctor quite earnestly in that regard. And if you do, pay very close attention to the advice that the doctor gives you.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the exemptions from fasting. So who is allowed to be exempt from the fast? So which groups of people don't have to fast when it comes to it?
Well, generally, the understanding is, and we're speaking as medical professionals who happen to be Muslim, and we're certainly not learned scholars of Islam, but our understanding is that underage children, pre-pubertal children are exempt from fasting, the elderly, people who are sick, people who are on a journey, who are fasting, who are traveling, and generally, as you mentioned in the first segment, pregnant, breastfeeding, and menstruating women exempt from fasting. Many of them, when well and they've recovered or the time has passed of that reason why they're not able to fast, are required, of course, to make up the fast at a subsequent time. But generally, those are the broad understandings that we have of the people who are exempt from fasting.
Okay. And if somebody is fasting and let's say that there's a medication that they have to take and they usually take it at midday, what sort of options, and again, standard disclaimer, we're not telling anybody to change how you take your medications, we're just talking broadly here, but what sorts of approaches would we usually take if somebody usually takes a tablet, let's say 3 times a day?
So one of the more common challenges that a person would encounter with fasting is that midday or lunchtime dose of medication. I know in the older days when I had just graduated 1,000 years ago, it was more common that medication was, even diabetic medication at one point was a 3 times a day common issue. Antibiotics often were 3 times a day, but fortunately in more modern times, twice-a-day dosing and daily dosing of medication is available. That being said, there are some meds that are required to be taken 3 times a day. Usually, if it's at all possible, and a person is able to take the dose at the iftar or the breaking fast time, in terms of one, the evening dose of medication, and the other dose at the sahur, or the time of eating before the start of the fast, then if a 3rd dose is required and it's at all possible, and this is certainly something that must be discussed with the physician or your doctor, one can consider the other dose in the middle of the night. But of course, there are realities to be contended with respect to taking a dose of a drug at the middle of the night, and there may be very specific reasons that the medication is given at the midday time instead of course, the midnight time. That being said, if a person is required to take a medication dose at the midday time or in daytime fasting hours, then strong consideration, if it's something that you really cannot do without, then strong consideration maybe have to be taken of not fasting, I would say.
Absolutely. So again, like persons who are so ill that they actually require certain medications be taken routinely would then fall into that category of exempt from fast. But there exists a lot of medications that the doses can be played around a little bit.
I think so, yes, it is possible. So antibiotics, for example, some diabetic medication, common things, commonly encountered things, but certainly it's a possibility that it can be adjusted with consultation with your physician.
Okay, excellent. So let's step back a little bit. About fasting, what sort of impact does the fasting state have I mean, we mentioned at the introduction that this has an intense impact on the body, on the body's performance, and it challenges the GI tract. What sort of effects does fasting have on the body? And
So,
particularly the fasting that is done in Ramadan by Muslims.
right, the fasting of Ramadan is a very specific fast. It's not a fast that is necessarily. I think the closest one that I can understand it may come to is something called intermittent fasting. It's close to that, if not very similar, in which at which point the person does not have anything to eat or drink during a certain time period. So when we're talking about fasting, we're going to be speaking about this type of fast and the impact that it has on the body. The body has certain natural reactions, what we call physiologically, and assuming it's a healthy individual, natural physiological reactions to the presence or absence of food and for how long that food has been absent for. So what usually tends to happen is that it's considered approximately 8 hours into not having anything to eat or drink. It's considered physiologically the body goes into a state of fasting. After that, what tends to happen, and somewhat before that as well, the body tends to need to draw down somewhat quite significantly on the stores of glycogen that is stored in the liver and in the muscles. That's naturally there for you to draw upon for energy. So in a period where you haven't eaten for a while, especially, or drank anything that contains calories, especially for a while, your body gets its energy initially from the glycogen stores. Similarly, it also gets energy from the liver, which produces glucose in the times when you're not having anything to eat or drink. But after a certain period of time, what tends to happen is that the body then switches more specifically into burning fat in order for you to be able to get energy. So those two major sources of energy, the easier one for you to access would be the glycogen, which is broken down by the body into glucose, and then subsequently it tends to favor the fat, and it breaks down the fat stores for you to be able to get energy for you to function. And one of the things that tends to happen on when your body is drawing down on its glucose stores, you see, as opposed to the time when you're accustomed to having something to eat on a regular basis, calories on a regular basis during the day, and you are giving your body external energy, externally, like something that contains glucose eventually into the blood. When you use up your stores, you tend to find that you get a little lower energy at that point in time, because you go from a phase, a state of functioning where you are giving its energy on a regular basis through the day to a state where it now has to call upon its own stores. So it's natural that the person who's fasting often tends to feel a sense of being a little more tired and a little more low energy during that time. Of course, as well, if they're a little dehydrated or they're not drinking during the day, that may contribute towards somewhat a lethargic or a sleepy feeling as well. So that's a normal physiological effect of of fasting. But eventually, as time goes by, over the days, your body tends to adapt during the month of fasting. And the average person tends to find that they feel a little more comfortable with the fast, that the body becomes a little more efficient, both in terms of producing its own glucose and then tapping into the energy stores of the fat. So as the month goes by, there's a very wonderful adaptation that tends to take place. A couple of things that tend to happen, interestingly, is that during the fasting state, the body actually tends to enhance its ability to produce its own glucose. The liver sort of learns that it needs to give you more glucose. So as the days go by, you tend to find that process becomes more efficient. Interestingly, with respect to your cholesterol, the initial impact on your cholesterol tends to be that it goes down initially, your total cholesterol and your triglycerides, or the fats in the blood, in the early parts of fasting. However, it does tend to rebound a little later on in the month. So it's not usually an efficient way of controlling your cholesterol per se. But at least one good thing is that it tends to enhance your body's availability of good cholesterol, which is the cardioprotective cholesterol, what we call the HDL cholesterol.
As we saw in the study just now.
That's right, exactly. Additionally, some interesting things that tend to happen, what we find is that it's not very likely to have a tremendous, in the average healthy person, it's not usually expected to have a tremendous negative impact on your blood pressure or your heart rate. It doesn't usually impact the electrolytes or in your salts in your blood significantly. In other words, your body has its ability to maintain its homeostasis, the balance of its chemicals, etc. So what you find is that you don't get, in the average healthy person, with a long period of fasting, you don't usually find that they tend to become electrolyte imbalance necessarily. Interestingly, over the period of time, there is a tendency for the average person to lose some weight. The average amount is about 4 to 8 pounds over time, as well as the average person tends to notice that the appetite tends to decrease as the month goes by.
Okay. So I think we've been going on for about 15 minutes now into the second segment. So let's take a break. We'll go and pay some bills and we'll see you. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
High blood pressure is as dangerous as an overpumped balloon. Measuring your blood pressure every day can save you from risk of high blood pressure. MicroLife fully automatic upper arm blood pressure monitor with stroke risk detection. MicroLife AFib screens for atrial fibrillation while taking your blood pressure. High blood pressure and atrial fibrillation are both considered controllable risk factors for stroke. If AFib is present during blood pressure measurement, the AFib icon is displayed flashing at the end of the triple measurement. Once 3 measurements are complete, the measurement data are shown on the display. MicroLife, a partner for people, for life.
Extra Foods Plenty for 20 is bigger and better with new items like Gala apples 10 for $20, Caribbean flavor spices assorted 6 for $20, Happy Chow Mein noodles 5 for $20, Ginseng up 250 ml assorted 5 for $20, Fiesta Vienna sausages 5 for $20, Marigold margarine 4 for $20, and Libby's mac and cheese 4 for $20. Over 40 items on special at Extra Foods Plenty for 20. Extra Foods, always something extra for you.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Doctor in the House. So we're here with our guest, Dr. Ahmad Rahman, and we are discussing Ramadan and fasting, the medical side of it at least. So Ahmad, tell us, some people have medical conditions that put them in a higher risk category when it comes to fasting. And what sorts of patients would fall into that category?
So a lot of people do have great concerns about fasting. Relatives actually talk to me about it, patients talk to me about it. There are some actual conditions that are quite high risk in terms of complications and problems that can arise that are quite serious during the fasting time. Like type 1 diabetics, the ones who are called insulin-dependent diabetics. Typically, they have been diabetics since childhood and they've been on insulin. And oftentimes that type of diabetic, as opposed to the adult onset diabetic or the non-insulin dependent diabetic, tend to be a little more challenging to have a blood sugar control. They're pretty much dependent on insulin. Oral medication doesn't really work. That type of person tends to be likely to have significant swings in blood sugar, either up or down, depending on their blood sugar, their insulin dose, for example. So they're pretty much entirely on insulin, and they have to take this insulin often a few times a day, depending on the formulation that is being used. That type of diabetic, I would say, is pretty high risk of having either what we call a hypoglycemic event, or a blood sugar that has dropped really low. It's quite dangerously, potentially so. Or hyperglycemic, where the blood sugar level is extremely high. And that has its own dangers. And all the other issues that can arise as a result of it. So a type 1 diabetic, I would usually say to them, be very cautious about the fasting, exceptionally so, more so than the type 2 diabetic.
And not uncommonly, I understand the type 1 diabetics are told absolutely no. I mean, and it's really the exception rather than the rule that type 1 diabetic is really able to fast. I mean, I think I read a study recently where they said in the study that type 1 diabetics are exempt from fasting. But those who had volunteered to try, what they did was a continuous blood sugar control, something that is just not even an option here in Trinidad, to continuously monitor the blood sugar. And it was very surprising to me that, well, this is the extent to which somebody who's that motivated has to go to fast as a type 1 diabetic.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah? I mean, a person who's really motivated to fast, it's very admirable. I would say that if they were successfully able to do so and safely, that's quite remarkable, because it is really very, very challenging with the swings of blood sugar that can happen up and down both ways. It's really quite serious.
Okay, and what about some other conditions that, you know, again, high risk? So there's this type 1 diabetic, definitely.
Right.
I suppose poorly controlled type 2 diabetics?
Yeah, I would say the type 2 diabetic is an interesting one. By and large, you wouldn't be likely to be told that because you have type 2 diabetes, you should not fast. What you may very well be told is that you should be well controlled before the month of Ramadan starts. And well controlled usually means having a proper understanding as to what medications, what's the dosage of medication that's used, and that your blood sugar control for the previous 4 months, the test called A1C test, HbA1c test, for example, should be at target, at least less than 8, it is said, 8%. So yeah, the type 2 diabetic typically can fast, but with the proviso that you're not usually looking to start achieving control of your blood sugar during Ramadan. That's really a very big challenge, and I think it's highly risky at that type of case. There are a couple other conditions that you could probably mention. People with heart disease and lung disease, that's quite significant, tend to be at high risk of running into some difficulty with fasting. For example, somebody who's with heart failure, who's on a diuretic like furosemide or Lasix, they tend to have significant risk of either fluid overload from an inadequate dose of a diuretic, or they may be at risk of having too much of loss of fluid, and of course fasting during that time where you're not going to be eating or drinking at any point in time. You could find yourself in some great difficulty. Other people who suffer with kidney stones, especially if kidney stones tend to come on rather easily if you're somewhat dehydrated and your urine that you're producing is very concentrated, you might find that the person produces kidney stones exceptionally more likely during Ramadan.
Because of that state of dehydration. With kidney stones, they're usually told to hydrate themselves and drink lots of fluids. And
Absolutely.
I mean, Ramadan is the opposite of that.
Absolutely. So yeah, those types of cases, you would usually be told, under all circumstances, I would still, as we mentioned before, you should have a conversation with your doctor. Don't just assume that what we are saying here would apply to you. These are guidelines, but generally you'll find that if you are a person who forms kidney stones rather easily, during fasting time or the fasting month, it's probably going to be a pretty significant risk of it happening.
Now, does that mean that the person with kidney stones is necessarily exempt from fasting, or is that a discussion that somebody should have with their doctor?
Oh, absolutely a discussion. Absolutely a discussion that you should have. Because there are people who, not everybody who suffers with kidney stones suffers with it in the same risk intensity. There's someone, for example, who might have a single episode of a kidney stone once in their entire life, and they've never had it again. And there are people who have, literally, they keep producing kidney stones on a regular basis, regardless of being well hydrated and so on. So, you know, it really depends on what your unique situation is. I would say the person who is on lots of medication because of kidney stone formation, like somebody who has uric acid problems, who suffer with gout and so on. Those types of people, especially if they've been producing kidney stones a lot because the uric acid levels are very high, during fasting times you may find the uric acid level goes up even higher, and there you go, you produce a kidney stone, or you may even get a gouty attack. That's a possibility. So certainly those are things that you want to discuss with your doctor specifically.
I suppose it would be in the best interest to stay very well hydrated at night time if they're going to make the effort to fast.
Okay, yeah, like we would have learned during our many years of growing up and fasting as young men, as teenagers, the mistake of not drinking enough at night and feeling the effects of it the following day. So, yeah, I mean, hydrating yourself properly at night as a person who's fasting, even who's considered fairly healthy and well without any medical problems, you do realize that there's a certain approach that you should take to fasting, especially important if you are unwell with a medical problem.
Definitely. What about arthritis? Does arthritis count as a high-risk condition, osteoarthritis?
So the specific types of arthritis, the most common one, of course, is osteoarthritis, the wear and tear arthritis. The people who get arthritis of that type typically suffer with it in the knees, on the hips, the degenerative arthritis. This is not the arthritis that we're talking about, like rheumatoid arthritis or gouty arthritis. So let's talk about osteoarthritis. The most common type of medication that we would use to help to control an arthritic pain would be an anti-inflammatory drug, an NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Commonly, you would find them aspirin-related drugs. You know, diclofenac, popular names would be Olfen, Cataflam, Ponstan, ibuprofen, Advil, Aleve, Naproxen, Naproxen, etc. So these drugs are often bought and available over the counter. You don't usually.
Flamar is
a common one.
Very common one now.
The Flamar type drugs as well. So these drugs are often available and purchased over the counter for pains, aches and pains, whether it's a headache or it's because of a back pain or an arthritic problem. But here you go. That has its issues with respect to health issues in general, particularly so during Ramadan, during fasting, for a couple of reasons. So you take the medication to help an arthritis, like a long-acting drug, anti-inflammatory drug, like an Olfen SR, for example, or what we call Divon CR. It's another option. So you take that and you notice the following day when you wake up, you take it at suhoor time and you wake up later in the morning and you notice that your stomach is quite sore and quite raw.
Just at the top of the belly.
Yeah, right up here, you have this gnawing kind of ache and burning sensation. Well, guess what? That's by itself, even if you weren't fasting, was going to be a potential problem. So often people tend to take these pills thinking that if you took it with a meal, you're going to be well protected with your stomach, and unfortunately, it doesn't pan out that way. And very often, my practice has been for a very long time. Once I'm giving an anti-inflammatory drug like that, I always give a drug called a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor. Commonly, you'll find things like Omez, omeprazole, Nexium type drugs, Ogastro, etc. These types, Pantecta. These types of drugs usually a one-a-day drug. And my practice routine, once I'm putting someone on an anti-inflammatory drug, even the ones that are supposed to be safer on the stomach, some things like Acoxia and Celebrex and Mobic, the ones that tend to be considered safer, I don't take a chance. I always put an PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, on board, and they're all once a day anyway. So here what? If you're going to be taking an anti-inflammatory drug during Ramadan, whether it's for arthritis, whether it's because you want to avoid a headache, whether it's because you're nursing a back pain or a neck pain or something like that, you really ought to consider discussing with your doctor taking one of the drugs that protects your stomach. You're going to be very happy at the end of the day compared to otherwise. Yeah?
Absolutely. What about epilepsy, patients who got epilepsy? We're talking about drug compliance and taking the drugs at a time of day early on.
Yeah, epilepsy is it's a tough one. There are many people who suffer with problems with epilepsy, difficult to control epilepsy, even on the ideal doses of medication. And oftentimes, epileptic drugs are multiple times a day. So like one of the popular ones, Dilantin, often it's a 3 times a day drug that you may find. Some are twice a day, like the valproate type drugs may be given twice a day. But the challenge with epilepsy is that I think at best you can expect that it reduces the frequency of the seizures and not necessarily guaranteed to stop the seizures 100%. What you may find is that during a fasting time, if you are on a drug that requires 3 times a day especially, and careful, if you miss a dose, as can happen, you may find that you've opened the door to epileptic seizure simply because you missed a dose. That kind of case, I would say someone who suffers with severe epilepsy, I would personally consider that person as not being someone who should consider fasting. And just one other thing, migraines can be rather debilitating. Quite severe, mild, moderate, and quite severe. And if you're a person who's suffering frequently with migraines, you know, it often is associated not just with severe headaches and sensitivity to light and sound, but there's a lot of nausea and vomiting that can occur with it. You may find, and of course, even a trigger for migraines can be hunger and dehydration, or even caffeine withdrawal, and some things that tend to be triggers, that tend to be part and parcel of fasting experience can simply be a trigger for your migraines. So yeah, that's another type of case that I would consider may not be in a position to fast.
Okay. So I suppose one thing I want to mention, I remember seeing a video on YouTube that resonated with me very much. It was about, there was a young gentleman who I don't think he actually said what condition he had, but what he did say was that he was told by his doctors many years previously that he could never fast and he would never be capable of fasting because of his unique condition. I suspect that he might have had severe Crohn's disease from the little hints that I got from it. And he really felt as if his Ramadan was worthless because he couldn't fast. You know, he really got this idea built up in him that the fasting was the big thing in Ramadan, and that's everything there was it. And we're not really talking about the Islamic aspects of it, but just from the psychological standpoint, is that accurate? Is there only the...
No, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Because I'm sure a lot of our viewers out there may well be persons who themselves are incapable or not capable of safely fasting for themselves or for baby or for some other reason. And, you know, what's up with that?
I can tell you my personal understanding of it. I'm not a scholar of Islam, but the things that I've come across in trying to understand the religion better, my understanding is that the month of Ramadan is a holy month by itself. It's the month that the Quran was revealed, and that makes the month a tremendously holy month. Fasting is prescribed for us during the month, and my understanding is that the fasting is not the sole holiness of the month. The month is a holy month anyway. So for example, those who are exempt from fasting, formally exempted from fasting by God in the Quran, it is still advised that they give charity, that they engage in extra worship and extra ibadat, if it's a possibility to read Quran more and learn Quran more and understand and learn more about the deen and the religion. So no, I would have to say that my understanding is the holiness of the month and the benefit that one can get spiritually from the month continues, even if you are not in a position to fast, and that you should observe the month in the best way that you can. with the best character that you have, refine the benefits that we can get from the month in terms of the spiritual benefits, I would say, in addition to the benefits that you get from fasting.
Excellent. So what about some advice, some day-to-day advice on fasting? From a doctor, what would you like to say to the fasting population of Trinidad and things that they, can do to prepare?
A lot of the things that we've mentioned before about the people who may not be really candidates for fasting, the ones whose medical conditions really are not safe. Aside from those, there are many people who have questions and they are concerned. Doc, should I fast? And it's not on that list of stuff that we discussed. It's other things. People who are asthmatic, people who are hypertensive, people who suffer with headaches as a result of it, people whose jobs are not easy jobs because they have shift work or because they work in very hot environments. And these are not easy conditions for us to make a very general statement. But there is one general advice. You really should have a consultation with your doctor if you are concerned as to whether or not your condition is the type of condition that puts you at risk while fasting. So by all means, I think the first bit of advice that I will always give with respect to any health issue on fasting is to have a conversation with your doctor. And ideally, you should have that conversation sometime before fasting month. Ramadan is due to start in about a week. We still have some time to have some conversations with your doctors. But I would say that that's a given. There's no getting around that because each person is quite different. And I would often have to sit and have discussions with my patients, and really they are saying to me, Doc, I really would love to fast. And I think I owe it to them as not just as a professional, but as a Muslim, to really work out my genuine understanding as to their safety issues. If I can find a way to help them to fast safely, I think I owe it to them to do that. So yeah, any doctor, I don't personally believe it has to be a Muslim doctor. It probably could be if you want to be certain that the person understands what the fast is all about, but any doctor, you really should have a conversation with that doctor. Another bit of advice, as is a practice of the Prophet, the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where we were told that we should fast some extra fasts in the 2 months prior to Ramadan, the months of Rajab and Shaban. The Sunnah is typically 3 days fast in Rajab, 3 days fast in Ramadan, and that's really good medical advice as well. I would usually tell my patients, if you're not quite certain how well you're going to cope with the fast, you may want to consider adopting or using the optional fasts of Rajab and Shaban as a practice time to see how well you can control your condition, whether it's diabetes or otherwise. You really should have a conversation if you are ill and your medication is the type of medication that is taken typically during what is going to be the fasting hours. You want to discuss with your doctor, is it possible for you to use like a common drug that we know, metformin. Most diabetics are familiar with the drug metformin. And strictly speaking, metformin usually is administered ideally 3 times a day. Ideally, let's say often twice a day, but sometimes there's a midday dose in between. But there's a long-acting version of it, extra extended release version. So that's one option that you can consider discussing with your doctor. Can I switch from the 3 times or twice a day version of this drug to a once a day version of this drug? There are some drugs that, like you brought up arthritis some time ago, just recently. One of the conditions that tends to happen in people who take anti-inflammatory drugs, like Olfen, for example, it's probably not very well known or understood, but there are some issues with taking these drugs long-term, not just with the stomach, but with the kidney. Actually also the liver, but in particular the kidney. And what tends to happen, especially older people tend to take these drugs. And even if you're taking an Olfen every day and you're also taking a stomach protecting tablet like the Nexium type drugs, Pantecta type drugs, it still can affect your kidneys. And it is something that should be monitored, especially if you're fasting. You may want to have the doctor check your blood do some tests to make sure that your kidneys are not being affected negatively during the month, especially if you're taking a dose of this drug on a daily basis. And then, of course, there are some meds that are specifically taken at either morning or nighttime, and you may want to discuss like anticoagulant drugs, for example, or medication like anti-epileptic meds for the person who is not necessarily a severe epileptic. You may want to consider taking at night, but you really shouldn't do this on your own. You should have a conversation with your doc about it. That's just some general thoughts that I can offer at this point.
So let me ask you some questions, just being devil's advocate here, because I'm sure people out there would have similar questions. If I needed to get an injection, an intramuscular injection, would that break my fast?
To my understanding, and this is to my understanding, and I certainly don't want to make it seem as if it's authoritative from an Islamic perspective, but my understanding it's not going to break the fast to get an intramuscular injection.
Which is going to be slightly different from an intravenous injection.
Right, so an intravenous injection has to be administered directly into the vein. And I would have to say that these are not, that aspect of it is still not 100% clear. So let's say, for example, a drug has to be administered by infusion, where a large amount of fluid has to be infused with the drug, versus a bolus dose of the drug, where it's simply given in a very small amount. I'll be honest with you, I'm not in a position to try to see whether that either invalidates the fast or it's allowed. My understanding is that intramuscular injections are actually allowed. And I don't think intravenous medication is accepted, but it is something that I'm not authoritative on, so I'm not going to say.
You know, we need a Maulana up in here to find out these questions. But similarly, my understanding is also, and I suppose we should probably stay a little bit away from this topic now, because neither of us are scholars, but my understanding is also that intravenous injections would break the fast, particularly if they contain nutrition of some kind. What exactly constitutes nutrition, I'm not certain, whether it's going to be a large amount of fluid, whether salt is considered nutrition, or dextrose or sugar in the veins, or what.
Exactly. These are the challenging ones that the learned scholars are the ones, as you know, as the years go by, we have challenges with applying the understanding of the rules. And certainly this is the type of information that it wouldn't be very wise for us to try to pronounce upon. I mean, it doesn't seem so to me. That's
I'm sure we have a couple of scholars at home that are watching the program. You could call in during the phone-in segment that's coming up very shortly, and we'd love to hear from you. All right. Let's talk a little, and we're going to go to the call-in segment in about 5 minutes. What about exercising in Ramadan? So can I go to the gym at nighttime during Ramadan? I mean, is it advised? Is it a good thing?
Well, I'll answer from a personal perspective. I have never done it. I think physically it's not something that ever. I think in my youth, very often I would be very keen on continuing going to the exercise during Ramadan. It's never happened. That's just me. On the other hand, there are many people who seem to be very keen on not losing the level of fitness that they've achieved over the months. And they're quite interested in at least continuing some aspects of it. Now, clearly, if you try to do intense exercise during the month of Ramadan, your body is going to handle it quite differently from whether it's nighttime or daytime. Your body's going to handle it quite differently. So it's very wise for you to modulate the way you're going to do it. So if you're not the type of person who's going to do like me and say, well, I'm going to take a month off from that kind of activity, which, by the way, isn't really what's recommended anyway. But you should tone it down quite a bit. And I'm just going to talk in some general terms here. This is not a very specific thing. There are some healthy habits that you should do that you shouldn't give up 100%. So, for example, relatively low intensity or medium intensity walking. There's no reason that we should stop doing that. But if you do try to do that, I would suggest you do it when it's not exceptionally hot outside, maybe in the evening. And I'm assuming that this is a healthy individual that's not with a medical condition.
This isn't the first time they decide to go for a run.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to challenge your heart during Ramadan for the first time with a run. but you're going to go for a walk, maybe a brisk walk, and you could probably consider timing it just before iftar so that you can hydrate right afterwards. But if you're talking about the gym, and I'm just going to leave it very general here. So if you're the type of person who does a bit of cardio and you normally run and you use a treadmill or you do some exercises, by and large, better time to do that is in the night when it's cooler, when you have rehydrated, or once again in the time when it's just before iftar. Or if you're really gung-ho about it and you're that type of person and you want to do it before suhoor, go ahead, give it a try, it's fine. But I would usually say the average person tends to tolerate that type of activity evening time, just before iftar time, or even in the after, between Maghrib and after Taraweeh, if you, like I said, if you're that type of person who's gung-ho. I'll throw in here that my son is very keen on continuing CrossFit during this month. Allah bless you, son, and make it easy for you. It's an afternoon class, inshallah. May make it easy for you, inshallah.
Yeah, I remember in my younger days as well, during Ramadan, there wasn't a limitation to doing things. For some reason, as soon as I crossed a certain age, that all stopped, you know.
Yeah, when youth is no longer your friend, or at least at your side, somehow things take a different perspective. But yeah, if you can continue with it, do it, inshallah.
Excellent, alhamdulillah. All right, so we're going to bring this segment to a close, and we're going to take a break, pay some bills, and when we come back, it's going to be your opportunity to call in and ask us any questions that you feel appropriate related to fasting and Ramadan, or any other medical question that you may have that we can try to answer for you. So don't go away, we'll see you in just a few shorts.
IBN can be viewed on the go now with the Airlink TV app for Google devices. Simply go to the Google Play Store, search for the Airlink TV app. Download the app, click on the link and fill out the form. The account activation will be emailed or texted to the user. It's safe as no credit card is needed. The first 30 days are free and you can subscribe and receive a box for your TV to stream the same content.
Keep refreshed with Oasis Premium Purified Water. Now available in more thirst-quenching options. 330 ml, 600 ml, 1.5 liter, and 5 liters. Choose the size that fits you best. Grab one today.
For the everyday lowest prices on all grocery items, trust Low Cost Supermarket for the widest variety of quality products at low prices. Freshly picked fruits and vegetables, healthy products for your well-being, high-quality meat cuts, and a warm and friendly service. Low Cost Supermarket, Sun and Main Road, Kunupia.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Doctor in the House. And I'm your host, Ahmad Rahman, here with my guest, Dr. Ahmad Rahman, my brother. And it's time for the call-in segment. So this is your opportunity to give the studios a call and ask us any questions that you find relevant and appropriate. Okay, so Ahmad, while we're waiting on the callers to call in, you know, I heard this story about a guy who was very keen to perform. Okay, I'm making this up. He was very keen to perform tahajjud one morning, and he pulled a hamstring.
Oh boy!
So what sort of?
Wow. Okay. Well, how easy is it to pull a hamstring at 2 o'clock in the morning if you're waking up for the optional early morning prayer, tahajjud? I think it's not so difficult if you're not in the best of shape, I would say. But even if you're in the best of shape, it's a good idea to engage in some degree of gentle stretching. Stretching is a really good idea. And this would apply, I would say, for general health issues. This isn't only for Ramadan. This gentleman would have experienced something like this outside of Ramadan. I mean, our bodies are machines that need to be taken care of. And you know, you will warm up the engine of your car before you decide that you're going to do a lot of heavy activity. Generally, that at least the older models used to do that. And similarly, stretching, gentle stretching, is a very, very good idea for many reasons. Stretching of the hamstring, stretching of the lower back, etc. Oh, we have a caller. You should go ahead.
We do have a caller on the line. We got a caller in from Sandy Grande. Hello, good evening. Welcome to Doctor in the House.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
This is our relative from Sangre Grande calling.
A
Relative?
relative?
A relative.
Rahman, one of the Rahman from Sangre Grande.
Oh, well, wonderful. So nice of you to call.
My first cousin.
Oh, really? I can't make out your voice, but very happy that you're on.
Yeah, I'm happy to see you all on TV.
MashaAllah.
And all the advice you're giving on Ramadan and everything.
MashaAllah.
Okay, mashallah. And I just want to say that you all were talking about exercises during the month of Ramadan.
Yeah.
But I don't know, from my perspective, the best exercise we could get during the month of Ramadan is 20 rakat namaz every single night for Tarawih Salah. Isn't that so?
Well, I certainly think it's a wonderful...
Isn't that a lot of exercise?
I think it's a wonderful form of engagement,
yes,
physically, spiritually, and emotionally.
Exactly,
I agree with you.
Especially for those people who could really make it.
Yes, yes, yes. By all means, absolutely. Inshallah.
Okay, thanks so much for the call, caller. So yeah, you know, that's a good point. Salah that we do, it in itself is a form of exercise, in that we are going through a large range of motions. We're stretching quite a variety of our ligaments and our tendons. But it's important to realize the different types of exercises and what are necessary. So cardiovascular exercise does require that our heart rate goes up a little bit and there's a sustained duration of exercise. And Tarawih is a very good spiritual exercise and a spiritually growing experience. But not necessarily as good for physical health maintenance. So during the month of Ramadan, 20 rakats Tarawih or extra prayers are certainly going to do our body good, but it's not necessarily going to be all the exercise that we need. So we have another call on the line from Princess Town. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Doctor, your program is very informative. I'm an asthmatic, and I heard one scholar was saying that...
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Could you turn down the TV a bit?
Yes, I turned it down already. Yes. You could use your puff.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well. Could you speak up a bit?
And not to the not to the stomach.
Yeah.
And I have to use eye drops all the time. So annually eye drops, I could use it because it's not the eye drops that goes down to the throat. You don't feel any taste. So I fast and I carry around a puff and my eye drops, but only when necessary I use the puff.
The inhaler?
Yes, that's the Ventolin.
Right.
Yes.
No, I would not comment here. I've actually seen advices that, and once again, please don't hold me to this, I'm not a scholar. I have seen advices where eye drops, as well as inhaled medication is allowed. I have actually seen opinions in which that is the case. But some of these things traditionally, you may find that you will be told that it's not allowed. We're not in a position to make it very clear whether eye drops, nasal sprays, inhaled medication, from an Islamic point of view, is allowed or not. It would have been great if we had a learned scholar, a scholar who would have been able to answer these questions. But we're not in a position to answer that.
Thanks very much for your call, caller, for your question. And just to go into that a little bit, and you're right, and we should probably clarify, the role of your doctor or your physician is to help you determine how necessary that medication is for you in the management of your particular condition. The determination as to whether or not that will invalidate your fast is something that a scholar should answer. If anybody has questions on the same, it would probably be a two-pronged approach to getting the solution.
We could probably clarify safely that oral medication is not something that you can take and fast. That's pretty standard. So what we'll be clarifying here is the ones that are questionable modes of having to take, the ones that are not considered food, and it's not an oral medicine, but it's like a nasal spray, nasal drops, eye drops that can find its way tracking to the back of the throat through the nasal lacrimal duct, etc. Inhaled medication like for asthma and so on. Those are not the ones. Those are the ones that we're referring to that we're not going to pronounce upon at all. But people have asked, well, what if I just dry swallow the tablet and it's not food? Can I? The general understanding is that no, it's going to invalidate the fast. I'm certainly pretty confident about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that way too. I'm not too sure if we have another caller on the line. Hello, good evening.
Yep, good evening.
Good evening.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Doctor in the House.
Yes,
I think we might have lost that caller, unfortunately. All right. Okay. So, speaking about about exercising during Ramadan, I suppose that's probably a highly personal thing. One of my very good friends, Alif, he actually makes it out to the gym almost or religiously during Ramadan. This was after Taraweeh and then go there. And then at one time in my life, I did try it. There was one Ramadan, I believe, where I did try to maintain going to the gym at nighttime. Was going through a difficult phase in life, I guess. And it was doable. It was something that was manageable. And probably dependent on somebody's pre-Ramadan state. And again, you probably shouldn't decide to go to the gym for the first time mid-Ramadan.
Yeah, just like if you have a medical condition, it's not really wise to try to figure out how to control it during Ramadan for the first time.
Oh, wait, hold up. We got a caller.
Oh,
hello, good evening. Welcome to Doctor in the House.
Yes, good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for taking my call. For these two esteemed doctors and brothers, Ramadan Mubarak to you all.
Ramadan Mubarak.
And my question is for you to address the nutritional aspect and the dietary part of fasting, both at suhoor time and for the iftar. Because culturally in Trinidad and Tobago, we like to eat until we can't eat anymore. But some of us who may be diabetic and may be on restricted diets and want to fast, we tend to want to break away from all the restrictions during the month of Ramadan. Also for the little ones, in the morning time for suhoor, some of them do not have an appetite to eat anything, and they may want to keep the fast with very little or nothing. Could you shed some advice of both situations? Thank you. Thanks a lot. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome, salam. Excellent questions.
Excellent questions. So, I probably want to tackle the persons who are diabetics and want to quote-unquote break away during Ramadan. And then, there's this concept that patients often have of taking a drug holiday and taking a period in time where they just, I'll just not take my medicines this month and just see what, that's a very bad idea. And that's not something that should be done. And of course, there are long-term consequences of taking even a month off of not taking your medications. And it means that there are going to be consequences of a month of high sugars that is going to be irreversible damage that's done to your body at some level or another. So during the month of fasting, people would therefore also feel that if they're taking in less foods, then the diabetes is probably going to be better controlled anyway. So it's okay if they just have an extra slice of cake or some fried foods at dinner, at iftar time and at dinner at the masjid. And that's not true at all. The diabetes continues through Ramadan, and the difficulty with diabetes is obviously the body is not able to tolerate that sugar load that's regularly in the diet. During Ramadan, that doesn't change. What changes is during a period of time in the day, you're no longer putting calories into your body. After the fast is broken and before the fast is started, the food that goes in still has to follow the same rules of the body. And I think the second question she had asked was about the little ones at suhoor, and when they don't have much of an appetite and the health effects of it. I would say that, you know, for short periods in time and previously healthy persons, fasting without eating suhoor in the morning is probably not going to be or have very dramatic effects, but over a long period in time, that's probably going to have, or, you know, for a few days during Ramadan, it's probably not a big deal. It's the sunnah, it's the practice. It was the practice of our Prophet that in the early hours of the morning they would get up and at least have a sip of water to commemorate that time of the suhoor or that preparation for the fast. So not really that bad if the younger ones didn't want to have a big suhoor. It's good to get them into the habit of it though. All right, and the nutritional specifics I would relegate to a dietitian who is trained in nutrition. And we have another call on the line from Princestown. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Yes, good. Good. Yeah, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Doctor, I have a problem because about a year ago now, I get this thing, but they tell me that my sugar and my pressure was high. My finger just started getting numb, like one of my hand, and then my face, half of my face, kind of getting slightly numb. Do you think I should fast this year?
Wow.
Okay, so I'm going to say that with what you've just described, there are a lot of possibilities as to what could be causing it. It may be something simple like carpal tunnel syndrome, and maybe possibly a Bell's palsy that's acting a little bit strange. But on the worst end of the spectrum, there could be very serious conditions. Those could easily have been symptoms of a stroke or symptoms of nerve damage or other things. Therefore, the question cannot be answered here with 2 seconds of history on TV. You have to see a doctor, and there has to be more details that are drawn out of you. Some are more personal, and some blood investigations that should be done. And an overall look at your health has to be obtained from qualified and experienced doctor to determine your specific risks in fasting and what fasting might mean if you were to try it. From the outset, from what it sounds like, I would be hesitant to. All right, and we've got another call on the line from Port of Spain. Good evening and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Yeah.
Hello, good evening.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I don't know if you know this voice, but Ahmad and Mayu, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Yeah. Yeah, what? I wanted to just say what I had learned about ear drops and nose drops and eye drops.
Yes.
Any orifice is bad for the orifice, but the eye drops, no, it's allowed. The eye drop, Maulana said the eye drops are allowed.
Yes.
In Ramadan, if you're fasting, but the orifices are the ears and nose, not allowed. I don't know about the spray for asthma. That's number one contribution. Number two is that I know from hearing from the Sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that he said, eat suhoor to strengthen your fast. So a little water may not do it. So people could try that, but it's a blessing in one way, and it's a benefit too, and it encourages a person to fast more, especially children. I know children, do you know children fast half day sometimes till midday? You give them a glass of milk and they continue. We train them. That's underage children, I mean, not above puberty. Anyhow, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you for calling.
Thank you very much for calling.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And yeah, that's definitely a good point. I mean, and certainly I don't want anybody to go away with the idea that we are suggesting that people should fast without having suhoor. Suhoor is very important, and it's a good habit to develop in young ones that are coming up fasting. I know for me, my memories of my first times fasting, the hardest part of the day was getting up for suhoor and getting that plate of food into me. And it really was not a pleasant experience every morning. And there were some times when I just have a little bit less. Luckily, I had parents that didn't really force me to have to eat a very large meal. And sometimes just a little bit of it and a sip of water, and I'd say that's all I could stomach. I would say that the nutrition is definitely important for the body, but I don't think we're going to have any terrible long-term side effects if somebody were to just have a smaller suhoor. What's important is that it's something that you can manage. Don't have a very large suhoor, because then you're going to have the opposite problem. You're going to get very hungry by mid-morning. So a reasonable, moderate suhoor, and at the very least, if nothing else, at least a sip of water. All right. And we got another call on the line from San Fernando. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Assalamu alaikum, doctors.
Walaikum salam.
I am a diabetic. I want to know how to manage the day during the fast, and when should I feel that I must break the fast according to the readings I get when I check my blood sugar.
Excellent questions. Excellent questions.
So she's asking about, according to the second part of it, where she was asking about when she should break the fast according to the readings.
Yeah.
What was the first part?
And the first part was with regards to how can she control her diabetes. How could she control the diabetes? Okay, so I can probably take, if you're all right, I can take the first part of it. Yeah. So this is really a guide, a broad guide, and I don't want anybody to follow these instructions without talking to your doctor. And so much so that I'm not going to say actually what I was just going to say, because I'm thinking about thousands of people in Trinidad suddenly taking the advice out of context and doing something very dangerous. So some of your medications that are taken twice a day can be taken once a day. There was a study done with one particular medication, sulfonylurea, and they found that whereas usually the medicines were taken 1 to 4 tablets in the mornings, that this can be safely taken at iftar time. The metformin can still be taken in the morning and evening time if it's usually taken twice a day. What's more important, as we have said here repeatedly today, is to have good diabetic control before Ramadan. If you have good diabetic control before Ramadan, you and your doctor can make a decision to continue good glycemic or good sugar control during Ramadan. If you've not achieved good sugar control outside of Ramadan, I don't think realistically fasting is a safe option for you.
Yeah. In terms of when it's might be wise for you to break your fast, I generally tell my patients, and this is my personal perspective, a blood sugar that is less than 70 milligrams per deciliter, less than 70 starts looking iffy, and you don't quite know, for example, what direction that's going to continue to go in. So if you notice that your blood sugar is 65 milligrams per deciliter on your blood sugar testing, and it's during the fasting day, during the day, and you have some hours to go, and you're not feeling well, and you're getting symptoms of hypoglycemia, tingling of the skin around the mouth and the hands, trembly, shaky, sweating, etc., that's symptomatic hypoglycemia most likely, and it is a dangerous condition, and that sounds like a good time to start breaking the fast. I'm not saying 65 is it. I'm saying that's my alert time if your blood sugar is dropping below 70. Often the average person tends to not feel 100% energetic. They can start feeling lethargic, tired, headaches, etc. During that time. But certainly if you start seeing a blood sugar of 60, 55, 50, that's really not good at all. And that's probably a good sign that you're going in a bad direction. You should consider breaking your fast.
Okay, and I'll add to that and be a bit more firm. If it goes less than 60, break your fast immediately. Don't think about it. Don't take a walk over and consider whether or not you should have a cup of tea. Break it immediately. And as Ahmad was saying, less than 70 with symptoms, you're feeling foggy, feeling confused, cold sweating, can't think straight, your blood sugar is low. Break the fast immediately. You should have a blood sugar monitor on your person to test your sugar at least 3 times a day for the beginning of the fast. to make sure that it is safe for you to continue to fast.
Yeah,
In agreement
definitely.
there?
Yep.
All right, we got another call on the line coming in from Shogunas. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
I just want to know the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Yeah, I'll just address it really quickly. Type 1 diabetes is called insulin-dependent diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is also referred to as non-insulin dependent diabetes. Just in general, the two types of diabetes, the end result is that your blood sugar is not well controlled. The type 1, the insulin dependent one, they tend to occur in childhood, and it's as a result of a problem where the pancreas, which produces insulin, no longer is giving any insulin. So the person is completely without any insulin whatsoever, and this insulin needs to be given externally, usually subcutaneously, and they normally need quite high doses of insulin. Oral medication can't work for the insulin dependent or type 1 because most oral medications, all of them, depend on to some extent or entirely on the presence of insulin being there in the first place in your body, or that your pancreas can give you insulin. And the consequences of an insulin-dependent diabetes situation is quite serious potentially, and it's usually not an easy scenario to manage. It's usually a very brittle situation that needs careful monitoring multiple times a day, oftentimes, and injections of insulin to be given in different formulations, possibly different times of the day. The type 2 diabetic is what we call adult onset most times. Even though we have a tendency for this type of diabetes to be occurring in younger ages, it's usually not in childhood, but usually in the young adult, especially people who are at high risk, like obesity and family history, etc., poor lifestyle choices. But typically, the insulin is present, but in less quantities than is normal, and body does not respond to the insulin in the same way. So it's insulin resistance. So you have insulin, let's say it's 50 units that you have in your body, but it behaves like 45, just giving you an example. Or let's say your body needs 60 units of insulin on a daily basis. It's not producing 60, it's producing 55. So it's both somewhat deficient in insulin as well as resistant to insulin. That's what type 2 diabetes is. And usually oral medication is going to either ask the pancreas to give more or ask the body to respond better. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, and we have time for our last call of the night coming in from Princess Town. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Yeah, I'm holding on.
Hi, good evening, and welcome to Doctor in the House.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I'm calling from 1 in 10 in Princestown. I'm monitoring your program very closely. I'm so proud to see two brothers doing Islamic dawah over the radio station. I must tell you, the information is flowing very smoothly. I'm proud to sit and listen to the information that you all are sharing. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you all.
I mean,
if your daddy Faiz was around, he'd have said the same thing to you all. I'm not calling my name, but I'm proud of both of you.
Jazakallah khair.
Good information. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Pleasure. MashaAllah.
Well, that was a lovely last caller.
Very nice. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah. MashaAllah. All right, so we've come to the end of another exciting episode of Doctor in the House. I hope that this has been a good episode for you. Ahmad, you want to give us any closing thoughts, any take-home messages?
Ramadan is a beautiful time of year for Muslims. We look forward to this time of year as being something that hopefully we receive tremendous benefit from Almighty God. There are realities associated with fasting, health issues, stress issues, work issues. Talk to your doctor if you're having any difficulty, any apprehensions about fasting safely, if you have any concerns, whether you're considered healthy or not healthy. If you're on medication, please do have a conversation with your doctor. Eat healthy, be physically active, stretch before Taraweeh, and inshallah, may Allah make this a very beautiful, beneficial, and full of blessings, Ramadan, for you and for all of us and the entire Ummah, inshallah. Ameen.
So we're here at the end of yet another episode of Doctor in the House. It has been an absolute pleasure having you with us. And in closing, this is your host, Ahmad Rahman, saying, hope you had a great time. See you next time. Don't forget to be awesome. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.